Well, I would say to start with, as you would send her to college, she needs to be in a church that preaches the Word of God, where she has an anchor point while she's in school and being bombarded with all of the secular lies, that on a regular basis she is hearing the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth coming from that pulpit. And I know when I sent my 4 children to college, the first negotiating point as we talked through that is there would be a church that you would attend while you're in college that preaches the Word of God, and that you would continue to be under that influence that you have been under for the last 18 years. So as we made the choice for our children, that was number 1 on the list. So I would start there, and I know the other men have many things to say. And I think that's God's design, the local church, and the preaching of the Word of God, that there would be a continual flow of sound doctrine and strong theology being built into my daughter's life.
Send her to Reformation Bible College.
Take the risk of repeating myself. However one does it, and I don't think it needs to be done necessarily in the old way, but the teaching of the shorter catechism. For this reason, not because it's Presbyterian, it's not actually very Presbyterian, but because part of its genius is the way in which, and I think the history of my own country bears this out, it taught youngsters to think from first principles. And there's almost a complete absence of that in the world in which we're living. And a youngster going to college who has learned from the inner logic of catechetical teaching that takes you back to first principles and teaches you how to work from first principles to conclusions will inevitably mean that that youngster will think much more clearly than their secular friends, and they'll be able to penetrate through the reasonings of both friends and professors because they know their own first principles, and they're dealing with a generation that has no idea that there actually are any first principles. And I know there are many other helps, but I think if our youngsters do not learn what is a very countercultural approach to life today, everyone has first principles. Not everyone knows they have these first principles or is willing to admit them. But the person who knows and is anchored in their first principles is in an enormously well-defended intellectual position to be able to reason through all secular philosophy. So that seems to me to be more important than to burden your children with 100 books about how to deal with secular philosophies and all the bits and pieces that they will be taught at university. We need to, and this really echoes, doesn't it, the whole raison d'etre of elements in Ligonier's ministry. The biggest need is to be able to learn to think biblically. And I think myself, when I think of why it is, if I may be a little ethnic, why it is that this tiny country produced individuals who were thought leaders in so many disciplines in the 18th and 19th centuries, there's one thing that all of these people had in common. They had all learned to think from first principles. They all knew what the real questions were, and they learned in every discipline to penetrate to the first principles and then to draw out the applications. And I think this is a tremendous strength that we've got in our Reformed tradition. Or, if need be, you could use the Heidelberg Catechism, I know, but I'll leave that to Bob.